funds have been sunsetting, those funds are not recurring funds within our budget. Moving on to the specific funds. The first fund is Fund 075, which is our general operating fund. Within this fund, we're looking at revenues of $30,229,437, with expenditures of $30,024,781. This is compared to last year for the FY22 budget, which was $30,219,707 and expenditures of $30,111,742. We're anticipating moderate growth potentially for this FY 2023, primarily due to anticipated increases in our state supplemental LIHEAP funds. There was some legislation that was passed a couple years ago that will allow those funds to double. And so we're anticipating some increases there, as well as funding to do some housing stability. This fund also includes regional initiatives for emergency rental assistance. We're still operating that program, though right now we're primarily doing more of eviction prevention services. It also involves planning department, as well as developmental disabilities, as well as our social services, and then implementation of energy and energy efficiency strategies. Staffing levels will increase proportionate to grant funding, as well as planned outcomes. Again, administrative costs less than 7%. I do want to highlight the budgeted fund balance. This budgeted fund balance of $4,330,062 consists of the emergency rental assistance funds that we still have from the federal government. Unlike other grants where we actually earn the funds after we've incurred expenses, these funds were paid to us in advance by the federal government. And so those are still being held as we continue to provide eviction prevention services. It also consists of compensated absences, as well as we are required to maintain 2% of our budget for operations in case we lose any funding. We should be able to at least operate for 60 days? At least 60 days. So the funds within that budgeted fund balance are restricted for that reason. Moving on to the next fund, this is Fund 104, and that's our early childhood fund. For FY23, revenues of $13,240,000 and expenditures of $13,105,500. And then you can see the comparison to what we presented to you last year. The budgeted fund balance within this Fund 104 is $3,072,095. This again consists of subsidy reimbursements that we receive from the state of Illinois. It allows us to have 3 staff in a classroom. Most Head Start programs in our state only have 2 teachers, but having this allows us to fund a 3rd person in the classroom, and that allows both health and safety for our children as well as for our teachers. It also includes the funded absences, as well as resources for us to maintain the facilities where we operate the program, which we now have 5 facilities. And then finally, I would say that we also do have funding that we received due to the COVID pandemic. So we have ARPA funding and other resources that we're still spending those funds, and those make up the $3 million budgeted fund balance that you have. This fund will allow us to utilize both federal and state funding. So we have federal funding from the Office of Head Start, which is housed within the Department of Health and Human Services. We also receive funding from the Illinois State Board of Education. It allows our funded enrollment within this program. I always say this, I don't like to say this number, but I guess I have to. It's 666 children and their families. It allows us to provide center-based programming. We also do have a component of the program where we do provide services at home. But we are able to serve both birth to 3-year-old children as well as 3 to 5-year-old children, and we get them ready for kindergarten. Again, the fund includes sustained efforts to incorporate really groundbreaking approaches, effective child and family service delivery, while securing qualified teaching staff and preventing viral transmissions. Moving on to the next fund, this is our Fund 110, which is our Workforce Development Fund. We're looking at revenues of $2,893,500, expenditures of $2,889,350. This is down from what we presented to you in FY 2022, which was with revenues of $4,529,954 and expenditures of $4,635,300. This is due to the fact that the state of Illinois, as a result of the 2020 census, we lost population, and the funding that we receive, these are federal funds, so it's a block grant that is passed through the state of Illinois, and due to the loss in population, the state of Illinois' allocation from the federal government was also reduced. So as a consequence, the allocation to the Regional Planning Commission was reduced by about $1 million by the state of Illinois. If we look at the budgeted fund balance, you can see that that's in the negative, $13,536,000. This is a timing issue. This is one of those grants where we have to incur the expenses and then submit for reimbursement to the state of Illinois. There's a delay with the state of Illinois reimbursing us for our costs, but typically before the end of the program year, which is June 30th, the state is able to catch up, and so we don't have a negative balance when the program ends. But this fund allows us to provide workforce development services in a 5-county area. So it's Champaign, Ford, Iroquois, Piatt, and Douglas counties. And even though we did lose the formula funding by $1 million, we've been able to make up some of that with our staff applying for some additional grants, and we were able to get $600,000 in funding from the state of Illinois to do an apprenticeship navigator program. And I've already explained the deficit fund balance. I'll move on to the next fund, which is Fund 475, Economic Development Fund. This is one of our revolving loan funds. We have revenues of $183,000 and expenditures of $233,000. The budgeted fund balance is $7,012,965. This includes funding that was for a revolving loan program that was discontinued by the federal government. This was through our community services block grant funding. This program was discontinued in 2014, and to date, the federal government has not collected those funds, not only from RPC, but from 35 other organizations throughout the state. But it also includes loan receivables as well as CDAP funding. These are restricted, it's a restricted budgeted fund balance. Again, it accommodates a revolving loan portfolio. However, due to the uncertain economic conditions, which include labor shortages, which I know most of us are still experiencing, as well as the supply chain disruptions, we're not anticipating to make any major loans out of this fund in FY 2023. The last fund I will present to you is Fund 474, which is the USDA loan fund with revenues of $15,030,000 and expenditures of $42,000. The budgeted fund balance of $799,000. Again, these are funds receivables, and the USDA we have to pay some of these funds back to the USDA, and so that is part of what consists of that budgeted fund balance. We also call this our Intermediary loan fund, which allows us to provide financing to rural communities with a population of less than 25,000. We've done this with the Village of Royal, Philo, and others like that. And with the Village of Royal is one that I fondly remember because one of the trustees from that village worked with us as well as with other county leaders to advocate for funding for their community, and we were able to loan them about $250,000 so that they could address a sewer issue for the downtown area, and I think this is going to allow for businesses to be able to establish in the downtown area. The last thing I'd like to highlight is a memo from myself to the county board. to basically highlight the funding that we received from Champaign County. I will begin with for FY 2023, we do have a membership that is assessed on the county. This allows us to do regional planning efforts, and for that we have budgeted $20,221. This represents a 3.3% decrease from what was provided last year. The next item I would highlight is also funding from the County Highway Department for our QWATS, which is our Metropolitan Planning Organization. And for that, it's a total of $35,223. It represents a 5% increase from the prior year. This allows us to have matching funds to support an additional $400,000 that we get from the federal government as a Metropolitan Planning Organization. The other funds that we're receiving from the county are for court diversion activities. This is for our Youth Assessment Center, and this comes from the public sales tax. For that, we have budgeted $320,000. This represents an increase of 14.8%, and this is consistent with growth and intensity of youth caseloads. I will also highlight last two would be another fund from the Mental Health Board to support our court diversion efforts. For that, we have budgeted $76,350. No increase with that fund. And the last one is funds out of the sheriff's budget, which supports our police training efforts. As you know, we coordinate training for our police officers in a 3-county area: Champaign, Piatt, and Vermilion County. And so out of the sheriff's office, we have budgeted $9,361, representing a 0% increase. Thank you. We'll take any questions.
Any specific questions for Delitzo or Betty about the budget items? Mr. McGuire.
Thank you, Delitzo, on your presentation, Betty. So what is staffing like? I know you say it's going to stay stable, but especially for early childhood, how do you see it? Are we having any luck, including, I guess, bus drivers too?
Yeah, staffing has been a challenge in terms of recruiting and retaining staff, particularly for that program. This was an issue even prior to COVID, but I think COVID has exacerbated it, especially with this, Great Resignation. And so one of the things that we have done temporarily is to close our Savoy site, and we have redeployed the teachers from that site to the other 4 facilities so that staff are not as overwhelmed due to shortages. And so we have a combination of vacancies as well as absences. And so, as I said earlier, typically we have 3 people in a classroom, and that helps us to maintain health and safety for our children as well as for teachers. But when you have, and we've had some pretty huge absences, that has an impact in us providing quality care for our children and families. And so a temporary stopgap measure has been to close our Savoy site. Once we get our staffing levels back to a great level, then we will reopen that site. We're also looking at different ways to provide incentives, both for recruiting purposes as well as for retaining staff. So those are some of our efforts.
We provided funds for another facility. Did that get completed, and how's that?
Yes, we are in the process of working through that. We have a real estate attorney that's working with us, and I know that Dana has been able to go look at the facility. We anticipate to be in that new location probably in the spring of 2023. And one of the things I want to explain so that, I know I talked about closing Savoy and we're getting a new facility. This new facility is primarily for early Head Start, which is 0 to 3-year-old, and so the configurations for that building will be specific for that age group. Our Savoy location does not serve that population. If we were to use that facility for that age group, there would have to be uh, considerable amount of resources paid to get that building to be able to serve that population. But yes, we are on track. We're working through um, um, everything else, all the due diligence, and I know we've been coordinating with the state's attorney's office as well as with the county executive's office.
Mr. Storr?
Thank you. Thanks to the RPC and the good work that you're doing to try to help young people at every level. I want to specifically ask if you could kind of elaborate a little bit on the emergency housing funds that you still have available. Could you tell us a little about those, please?
I don't know if I don't have the exact amount, but and I'll defer to Betty on that. But what I will say is what we're doing right now is eviction prevention. So we have staff that actually will go to eviction court and working with individuals that need assistance. And so we've pivoted from providing rental assistance to eviction prevention with the resources we have remaining. We have until 2025 to spend those funds, and so we still have some time to provide services in the community.
Thank you.
Thank you. Next is the Children's Advocacy Center, and here's where Tammy is going to take over the presentation on behalf of the rest of the county offices, pretty much. These are all special funds at this point this evening, and they will be also included in the county's budget, but are under special revenue funds. And you probably should see some of the slides Tammy's working on. The handout is the slides that she's working on. We had to do those at the last minute.
Good evening. Before I start with the presentation, I just have some thank yous that I want to extend. As Darlene mentioned earlier, the work that you see in front of you tonight represents implementation of 2 new budget platforms. One is Central Budget Entry through Tyler Munis. The county offered 4 trainings to the department heads and elected officials for Central Budget Entry, and for the most part, departments took advantage of at least 2 of those trainings. Some departments did all 4 trainings. So pretty much across the board, we had complete buy-in and ownership of the elected officials and departments using the new Central Budget Entry through Tyler Munis to prepare their budgets. The budget publication software that we used this year, called PADS, was the second software that we implemented, and we did not have the capacity to train on that as well as Central Budget Entry. So the administrative staff in the county executive's office, particularly Megan, Mary, and Rita, took on a large portion of that responsibility, basically transferring information from the Word documents that the department heads and elected officials used to the new production software. So a special thank you to them, because I couldn't have done it without them. And so we are going to start tonight with the Child Advocacy Center, and the Executive Director, Carrie Miller, is here if anyone has specific questions for her in regards to her budgets. In fiscal year 2022, the CAC received a significant increase in funding that was largely related to ARP, and they used that funding to make improvements in their facility. I know the county's ARP funding was used for flooring replacement, but there were several other improvements and purchases that happened for CAC because of that additional funding. The CAC also receives grant increases from DCFS and the Attorney General's office, and in fiscal year 2023, they have budgeted a little over $7,000 in expected private donations. I'll pause briefly after I present in case there are questions.
Okay, that's, just so you know, that's it for this budget. We're just doing the real brief overview. Any questions for Carrie? Okay, thank you for coming tonight, Carrie. Go ahead.
Since Ms. May is here, I'll ask her, has there been an increase in need for services?
Carrie, you can.
What was the question, Chris?
I asked, has there been an increase in need for services?
So we've really remained about the same during COVID. We only shut down for 2 weeks, so we were required to maintain operations to continue to provide services for kids in the community because the abuse didn't stop even when kids were at home. And actually, we had a little bit of an increase as children were left with caregivers that parents weren't real familiar with.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for coming, Carrie.
The next budget is GIS Consortium, and Director Leanne Brehab Riley is also here tonight. This is the county's joint venture fund, and in fiscal year 2023, GIS is going to be budgeting additional funds for an expected payout due to an employee retirement. GIS has a 5-year capital and technology plan, and for next fiscal year, they are appropriating a little under $72,000 for replacement of those items scheduled per that plan. Fiscal year 2023 also represents the orthophotography acquisition year, and so there is a revenue to expenditure deficit budgeted, and that is planned as the GIS Consortium collects membership fees for orthophotography over a 3-year period with the expectation that they will expend those in the 3rd year. Just advance notice, the GIS Consortium will be coming to the County Board in September for a budget amendment. If you recall, we had budgeted for the LiDAR contour project, and that did not get completed in fiscal year 2022, so the budget amendment will in part be for the remainder of that project.
Mr. Goff?
Yeah, quick question. Tammy, how does the fund balance go up when we've got such a revenue to expenditure deficit? Is it a transfer? Is it,
When you say go up,
well, sorry, went down. Sorry, wrong way.
you caught me off guard.
Mr. Storr?
Thank you. Since Ms. Brehab is here, I'll kind of say something nice on behalf of the GIS Consortium and the folks there, is that because the county put in some money for LiDAR acquisition, that meant that we had the chance to review the imagery before it was delivered, and it was discovered that some of the classification of the LiDAR was not done or not done properly, and Champaign County is one of a few counties, perhaps the only one, that got LiDAR delivered properly with all of the imagery classified properly. So good on them. I yield back the remainder of my time.
Okay, thanks for coming tonight, Leanne. And kudos to your team.
The GIS fund is the next budget. Revenue from this fund comes from documents that are filed and recorded in the county recorder's office, and they are used to pay for the county's portion of the membership in the consortium. The membership increase in fiscal year 2023 is a marginal 2.5%. This budget also pays for the ESRI licenses for the county departments that use it. For the Board of Health, we have here with us tonight the Chair, Krista Jones, Administrator Julie Pride, and the Secretary Treasurer, Kathy Emanuel. In fiscal year 2023, the property tax levy increases almost 7.8%. And this levy that the county levies for is split between CUPHD and the Board of Health based on EAV. The current fiscal year split is 44.6% of that going to the Board of Health, and the 2023 budget is prepared at that same level. We don't know what that split actually looks like until the spring of the next year when we get those numbers from the county clerk's office. But we, at this point, have just prepared the budget at the level amount of the current fiscal year. In 2023, the COVID-19 crisis grant is going to continue, and so it is budgeted, it is expected and budgeted that the remainder of that grant at the end of this year will be $182,000. Also budgeted in fiscal year 2023 is some fund balance for emergency services, $15,000, and any emergency services that are provided and funded have to be approved by the board chair. There's $30,000 to come from fund balance budgeted for sex education in county schools, and then $27,000 for assisting Smile Healthy in the recruitment of 3 dentists.
Mr. McGuire?
How many dentists do they have now for the program? They have the 3 dentists filled? Still
Is
recruiting?
it 6? You're wanting to get 6 dentists total? Yes. So currently, you can come to the microphone.
Sorry, I'll have to hear your melodious voice.
So yes, currently Promise Healthcare has recruited 3. They need 6 dentists total. The expenditures would be primarily for recruitment costs in recruiting those individuals, as well as sign-on bonuses. It's standard practice to do a $15,000 sign-on bonus to attract a dentist into a rural area. And so we're hoping to increase that to 6 dentists in their presentation. They currently have a waiting list of 600 adults and children in the county who are currently not being served. They had to close services because they did not have a dentist to be able to provide those services. So they hope to start services again next month and then expand those services. And they're currently working with Carl on an expansion of their property to be able to supply services with those 6 dentists. You're welcome.
And the $27,000 represents only the Board of Health's portion of that recruitment cost.
Yeah, they're well over, for each of those line items, it's in the $76,000 to $77,000 range. So 30% of the residents that are served are in the county, and that's why we're only appropriating for those funds, for just county residents only.
Ms. Lockton?
Just a follow-up question on that. Are those the dentists that see students in the schools here in town as well?
I didn't ask that specific question of Promise Healthcare when they presented to us last week. I would assume so because they would be providing services across. Julie, do you have anything to add to that?
You know, I'm not sure. We could share.
Champaign-Urbana Public Health District does the Champaign and Urbana schools. So we are doing sealant and everything. We're already in there. And then Smile Healthy does the services surrounding. However, they are going to be in the Urbana School-Based Health Center. They hope to be with the new dentist. So the kids that we get from the program that qualify for or are in Urbana, then they will be funneled into there. Well, funnel's not a very good word, but you know.
And these are additional
Thank you.
expenditures, so we continued our allotment of $50,000 to them to provide specific dental care to children in the county. So they will continue to do those mobile services. They'll continue to go in the schools and do things like sealants. They'll continue to identify children with caries and other types of of dental needs, and then they'll refer them to the dentist for those procedures.
Ms. Michaels?
So if I'm hearing you correctly, that your portion is also going to find dentists that will help in the rural areas, correct?
That is
They
correct.
won't have to come to Urbana. You're still going to keep them on the outline with some of these funds.
That's correct. That's
Okay,
the
thank you.
intent, yes.
all of the funds that go to Smile Healthy are, from the county board, are for kids outside of Champaign and Urbana.
Yeah, it is great that we have a local health department that we're able to contract with to leverage our services, but it gets a little confusing sometimes. Okay. Okay, go on, Tammy. Thank you. Thanks for coming tonight.
The next 5 budgets are related to county highway. We have our county engineer, Jeff Blue, here tonight if there are questions. The first budget is the operating budget for county highway. In 2023, we are budgeting for a DCEO grant for a drainage project in Wilbur Avenue that has not yet come to fruition. We did budget for that in 2022. Doesn't look like it's going to happen this year. Major expenditures for this fund include purchase of a new tandem truck and other equipment in addition to some infrastructure. And the fund balance that you see here also includes $602,000, which is part of the highway building capital department. And in 2023, there's going to be a transfer of $120,000 to the highway building capital for reserve funding for the building needs of the highway facilities. I'll go ahead and present all of the budgets, and then if you have specific questions of Jeff, we can have him come up. The next budget is the county bridge budget. And in 2023, this appropriation includes replacement of 6 bridges and 8 to 10 smaller county and township projects. According to Mr. Blue, the cost of construction for bridges has doubled in the last 10 years, and that the county actually needs to be replacing about 10 bridges a year to keep up with the 60-year replacement cycle. The county leverages dollars in this fund to match IDOT funding for our projects. The motor fuel tax fund is also a major fund for the highway, but has taken a little bit of a break the last few years because the county has been using the IDOT rebuild grant for much of its large road projects. And that grant funding will be expended at the end of next year. So we will be using motor fuel tax fund balance to engage in some of the larger road projects in the upcoming years. 2 of those projects scheduled are for County Roads 12 and 24, and those are budgeted at just under $8 million in 2023. The Highway Federal Aid Matching Fund is a levy fund, and we use this fund to leverage Federal Highway Administration dollars. There are no projects scheduled for 2023, but according to Mr. Blue, we are expecting a project in fiscal year 2024. So there is no appropriation for fiscal year 2023. The levy dollars that are brought in will go to fund balance to be used in 24. Last budget is the IDOT rebuild grant, and we received the last portion of that grant in this fiscal year, and we're budgeting for the remainder of that grant to be spent next fiscal year on a County Road 32 bridge replacement project.
Ms. Furtado.
This is just more sort of a general statement. As we move forward with the build out of the broadband infrastructure, I just want to make sure that we are coordinating this as carefully as possible, both with the Forest Preserve and their trails projects, but also specifically with highway. The number one concern I continue to have with broadband is I think it's a pretty aggressive timeline, especially to work through all the easement work that's going to have to be done and in the build out of that infrastructure. And so as we are looking, I think we really need to carefully look at what our highway projects are scheduled for the next 3 years and how those corridors might correlate to the broadband in order to ensure that as much as possible we only do easement work once, we only dig once, and also that could perhaps help us continue to leverage that money in more ways. So if we're going to be doing ditch and roadside work, So just making sure that highway is very looped in to that, I think is incredibly important.
Jeff and I can talk more about that as we go forward. Any questions? Okay, thanks for coming tonight, Jeff.
The next budget is our animal control budget, and the director, Heather Soder, is here tonight if there are questions. One of the changes that we will be making in fiscal year, actually, we've already implemented this change. There are some fees, fines, and penalties that are collected on behalf of the villages and municipalities and passed on to them. And so we will no longer be budgeting for those. They will just be recorded on the balance sheet. So some of the adjustments that you see, the lower revenues and expenditures that are reflected in fiscal year 2023 are the result of that change. In 2022, we have implemented new software for animal control and shelter management. This was originally budgeted in 2021 and didn't happen. So it has happened now. They have procured that software, although I'm not sure if it's active yet. Okay. Yeah, so it's not implemented, but it has been ordered. And I forgot to mention the Animal Control Administration budget, for some reason, did not print in your packet, so you have that tonight. And we actually made one change today after that was printed. We added $15,000, not necessarily in the administration budget. I think I added it in the warden budget for equipment. There's not anything specifically planned, but if there would need to be the purchase of equipment, that appropriation is available for the department to use. And so the fund balance with that appropriation is actually $413,324 in fiscal year 2023.
Mr. McGuire.
I just wanted to let Ms. Soder know that you have a better chance of passing the budget if you bring puppies, not cats. Thank you.
We have both puppies and kittens. We can pass out at every meeting if you'd like. Although we are not an adoption agency. Yeah. Did you have a question? Okay, thanks for coming tonight, Heather and Cheyenne.
Mental Health Board is our next budget. The Executive Director, Lynn Canfield, is here. And the Mental Health Board budget is a levy fund, and these funds are used to contract with community-based providers for services. This is a competitive process, and Ms. Canfield does an excellent job of providing information on the website about what exactly those services are. If you haven't looked at that, it's easy to find on the link. The link's actually in their budget document if you want to go and read specifically about those programs and the level of funding that is given. So although that is for 2022, right? 2023 is not up there yet, is it? Oh, it is? You can, yeah.
Go to the page today and click on the link to see all the funded programs. They apply to July 1st of 2022 through June 30th of 2023, because most of the agencies use state contract and state fiscal year for their structure, so we do the same. It makes our budget kind of weird. Okay.
You can stay.
Okay. I'll be quiet.
Also, Mental Health Board has been providing financial management coaching to help with accountability for the agencies. And do you want to speak to that? Because you can speak to that better than me.
Okay, it's a very small amount of money, but actually a great side effect is they tell us what they think of our systems. So I am fully now looking at our systems, our forms, trying to make things less glitchy. But the purpose of these, it was a bookkeeper last year, bookkeeper and an accountant, and this year it's just the accountant They're working with 3 to 4 agencies at a time who are small agencies who struggle with the software. Like QuickBooks is apparently not very easy to use. So we've also found we may be able to help people get support in using Excel for budgeting through the U of I for free. I'm working on that with a professor there now. That would take a little bit of the pressure off of this consultant who's doing the work. But this is the second year that we're offering that. I think we kind of need it on both sides. Like, what is the support that agencies need to be fully accountable to meet our expectations? And then are our expectations, like, to some extent outdated or redundant or overly complicated? Most of the time, I think no. So, anyway.
The next budget is the IDD Special Initiatives budget. This is what was historically referred to as the SILA. And the 2 homes that were operated by the Mental Health Board were sold in 2020 and 2021. And so you can see that fund balance is reflected as increased. And part of this inability of the board to continue that operation is a result of workforce shortage and also uncertain funding at both the federal and state level. So the funds from the sale of those homes will be used to address the unmet needs of people who are eligible and possibly to, according to Lynn, counteract the workforce shortage. For the Developmental Disabilities Board, again, a levy fund, and these funds are used to provide contracts with community-based providers. The website's an excellent resource, again, if you want to see what programs are funded and at what levels. And the Developmental Disabilities Board does cost share with the Mental Health Board, so there's a transfer that is budgeted from the DD Board to the Mental Health Board for administrative costs. And the last bullet point here, agencies are continuing to explore innovative supports and to participate in monthly learning opportunities that are hosted by the staff in the DD board. And this, I guess, has expanded to beyond just agency support and is also inclusive of family members and stakeholders as well.
Yeah, this fund carries a super healthy fund balance in comparison to expenditure. Is there a reason why?
We actually, the DD board ran out of money one year. It's because they have to, the obligations are like 90% for the DD board into those agency contracts. So we pay out on those for 6 months without any money in the fund. So we have to start the year with that extra money. So this is why it's about half. We did run out of money at 1 year, and the DD board borrowed money from the Mental Health Board, and we all got through it. But we're trying to, they're deliberately trying not to take it to zero for the last couple of years.
Okay, thank you, Lynn. Next, we're going to move on to some of the internal, I would say internal kinds of things that have to do with the operation of the county itself.
The Courts Construction Fund is a fund that was open back in 1999 with the remodel and expansion of the courthouse, and there still remains a very nominal balance in this fund. We did not spend anything in fiscal year 2022. I'm appropriating the remainder of this fund balance in fiscal year 2023 in case there are any projects at the courthouse that are necessary that we could use this funding for. We did some work a couple of years ago with some technology fiber throughout the building, but for the most part, there's not anything specific planned. If something unexpected comes up, we'll have this appropriation if needed. The Courthouse Museum Fund is the next fund, and this is established to maintain the museum area that is focused on Abraham Lincoln. The Lincoln Legacy Committee makes decisions about this funding, and for I think as long as I've been here, there has not been anything spent from this fund. I did go ahead and appropriate $5,000 just in case there is a project or something that this committee may want to engage in. They would have that flexibility to do that. I know that with relocation to County Plaza, it's possible that there may be some work that might want to be done in that regard. But nothing specific has been given or directed at this point. The Public Safety Sales Tax Fund is where the county receipts its quarter-cent Public Safety Sales Tax Fund. And the programs that are budgeted in this particular fund include the Youth Assessment Center, which is 5% of revenues. That represents $320,000 in fiscal year 2023. The reentry program, the jail classification system, and also paid from Public Safety Sales Tax Fund is the public safety building utilities and minor maintenance costs, and 15% of the JANO contract, as well as the Capital Asset Replacement Fund, departments that qualify for public safety sales tax use. What I forgot to put in the bullet points here today is that there is also a $1.3 million transfer budgeted from the Public Safety Sales Tax Fund to the general fund to help offset the costs of the $3 million out-of-county boarding that is budgeted in fiscal year 2023. And then debt service is the largest portion of funding that public safety sales tax dollars go towards. In fiscal year 2023, 48% of funding goes to debt service, and that includes the expected payments that would be associated with the jail consolidation debt issue that the county plans to undertake at the end of this year. So you can see from this chart, the blue part of the bar represents the county's current public safety sales tax debt service, and the red part would represent the issuance of the debt for the jail consolidation project as it sits right now. I know Facilities Committee is still working through that. There's still some architecture and engineering that needs to be done, so this is preliminary at this point. But the cost at this time is expected to be $22.9 million, of which $17.36 million would be through the issuance of bonds and $5.525 million ARP dollars. The $5 million was what the county board had committed at the beginning of this project. The $525,000 is for the video surveillance project that didn't come to fruition this year, so I have carried that over to be part of this project next year. And I just want to point out, in 2027, you can see that the debt service drops. The 2016 issue matures at the end of 2026, and then the 2014 issue matures at the end of 2028. This model is based on a 20-year debt service plan, and that would mature in 2042. I have also asked our municipal advisor to prepare a little bit more expedited plan for us to review, and that is a 14-year plan. So that's something as we are working through this process that we can talk more about. This particular scenario reflects a 20-year debt issue. And I can give you just the most current numbers on that if you would like. That would basically be debt service payments for the first 6 years between $800,000 and $900,000, and then for the remainder of the issue of about $1.65 million. The all-in interest cost at this point are estimated to be around 4.4%.
Tammy, when do you anticipate, I know we've discussed this, but I just want to make sure, because this is a very, very important vote. When do you anticipate the issuance of the debt that you're going to bring that to the board?
Next month.
Next month?
The authorizing ordinances, as long as we have, pretty solid numbers or close to solid numbers, the authorizing ordinances are expected to come to the board in September.
I won't be.
Mr. McGuire?
Thank you, Tammy. Thank you for doing all of this in preparation and consolidation in the both buildings. And you mentioned the cost of the housing of inmates out of county, and that some of the money is coming from a certain fund. Help me understand where that's reflected for the next couple of years, or next year, this budget, because obviously it's going to be $3 million next year. The jail won't be completed. And then the year after that, maybe close to that, but it'll continue into the future. Can you touch base on that, please?
Sure.
Don't move forward.
We'll actually talk a little bit more about that tomorrow night. That is budgeted in the corrections budget. It's, I think, $3,066,000, I think, is the exact number. So the largest portion of that would be funded through the general fund, with this $1.3 million transfer going in to help support that. And the last communication that I've had with Dana and the architect and engineer in relation to what the timeline looks like, we'll probably be budgeting for at least 6 months in 2024 for out-of-county housing. So maybe half of that $3 million. The county's capital,
To follow up on that, for 2024, is the entire hit of the half going to have to come from fund balance, or is there going to be capacity in public safety sales tax to take any of that burden? Do you anticipate? Or is it too early to say?
I think that public safety sales tax may be able to support, some of that cost. I will just, actually, we're getting into the capital asset replacement fund. I mean, we have pulled back on full funding in capital asset replacement fund for both public safety and Gen Corp, just because we have these significant costs this year and into next year.
Thank you.
Capital asset replacement fund, as I just stated, is for current only funding. And if you turn to, let's see, pages 104 and 105, you can see that we have basically implemented 2 new departments they're not even really departments. We have the facilities department that's in the capital asset replacement fund. We have created 2 new sub-departments under the facilities departments, which we refer to as future use code departments. And they are for the jail consolidation project and for the county plaza construction project. So you can see here that we're expecting the receipt of the bond proceeds at the end of fiscal year 2022, and we are budgeting for the full expenditure in fiscal year 2023, although we know that these projects are, especially the jail consolidation project, is going to move into fiscal year 2024. We don't want to cut ourselves short in 2023 in regards to the appropriation. So we will, at the next budget cycle, determine what our expected expenditures will be at the end of 23 and budget for the remainder of that in fiscal year 2024. And I think I'd already stated this earlier, that the board's commitment of $5 million for the jail consolidation project, and then the $525,000 for the video surveillance, those you can see are shown as a transfer in to the jail consolidation sub-department in fiscal year 2023. And I just want to reinforce that these numbers are very likely to be changing based on The interest rates, the timing of the issue, the total amounts as the facilities committee continues to work through that. So this is just preliminarily to get this information into the budget and to show you as best we can what we expect it's going to look like.
Any other questions about the capital plan? Does anybody want to take a 5-minute break before we move on? Okay, let's take a 5-minute break. 5 minutes. We're starting up again. Our 5 minutes is up and then some. Okay, I think we left off at IMRF, Tammy.
Yes. So IMRF and Social Security, the next two budgets are, there are some operational changes we have the ability through the ERP now to make. So this fund is paying for the general county portion of the IMRF plan only. All of the IMRF contributions for the other funds are now being directly paid by those funds rather than passed through this particular fund. In fiscal year 2023, we are budgeting $500,000 towards the unfunded ECHO liability. And if you recall, the ECHO IMRF plan is the elected county official plan that we no longer have any current employees in. So this is just direct funding that the county has to pay for that portion of the plan. And I believe the unfunded liability, off the top of my head, I think is around $1 million. Again, as I mentioned earlier, this particular fund is for the general county employer portion of the Social Security program, and all of the other funds are now paying for their Social Security obligations directly. So you can see that in terms of the reduced budget and expenditure in fiscal year 2023. Tort Immunity Fund pays for the general county's portion of work comp, unemployment, insurance, and premiums and claims. This is the fund that has carried a negative fund balance for many years, and that is because the levy growth has not been able to keep pace with the cost of the expenditure growth. And we have taken measures in the current fiscal year to correct that negative fund balance. And the way that the county did that is that the reallocation of the former nursing home operating levy was made to tort immunity, and then we are not transferring that amount to self-funded insurance. We're allowing it to stay in tort immunity fund, but still giving the home credit for that amount towards what it owes to self-funded insurance. And in 2023, the levy growth also allows for there to be an additional slight increase in the fund balance. And so by the end of fiscal year 2023, we expect this fund to have met its recommended minimum fund balance of $500,000. Self-funded insurance is our next budget. And this particular budget receives revenue from Tort Immunity Fund and the other county funds for its auto, liability, property, unemployment, work comp claims, and stop-loss insurance premiums. This fund balance actually exceeds the actuarial central estimate of unpaid liability. That sits around $3 million right now, and as you can see, this fund balance is around $6 million. So now that the county has paid for its last claim that was related to CCNH, and it does have, and the Tort Immunity Fund has a positive fund balance, administration's recommendation for future billings to county funds from this fund be discounted in order to provide the fund some relief, with consideration given to the actuarial recommended fund balance that we not fall below that amount. Employee health and life insurance. The Labor Management Health Insurance Committee last week approved a renewal with Blue Cross, recommended approval of a renewal with Blue Cross Blue Shield for a 6.2% increase. So that was good news. And this is basically an internal service fund for both the employer and employee health insurance contributions. Also, the county's EAP, which is its employee assistance program plan, and flex spending. Other costs that come from this fund are our broker and for our actuary fees.
That recommendation from the Labor Management Health Insurance Committee will be coming to the board at its September meeting.
The nursing home post-closure fund, in this fiscal year, the county received the final 1/3 of the escrow holdback, which was $110,000. And unfortunately, the new owner, University Rehab, continues to be under a Medicaid audit. And so the PAP refund that University Rehab is holding is not being paid back to the county until that audit is complete. There's not an expected timeline for that. It's been going on for over 2 years. At this point, the liability on the county side is a little over $300,000, which is double what the PAP refund that University Rehab owes the county. And so in fiscal year 2023, we are budgeting a portion of the fund balance that remains should the county be required to pay back any recoupment obligations once the audit is complete.
Ms. Michaels?
Yeah. Tammy, is that part of the 300? Does that have something to do with the 150 that's being put aside on expenditures for fees, fines, and penalties? Page 119.
The $352,000 fund balance, is that what you're asking? If it's
Well, there's 150 being put aside for fees, fines, and penalties, and I didn't know
Right.
if that had something to do with also this other money when the audit came down, that we wouldn't have enough to pay the full amount.
Yes.
Okay.
So I believe this I have to double check with Orion, but because I talked to him about this a little over a month ago. And I can't remember it off the top of my head, but I believe the fund balance includes the refund that University Rehab owes the county, just an FYI. Yes, I'm saying that I'm budgeting $150,000 in addition, because if we would have to pay back, we owe over $300,000. They only owe us $150,000, so we would not be able to pay in full. There's also another United Healthcare, I believe. We continue to get contacted by them about amounts that we owe them as refunds. Stephanie Berkey hasn't been with us for over 12 months, but before she left, I had spoken to her about that, and she said we did not owe that, but it would, and it's around $60,000. It would take a substantial amount of work to be able to prove we didn't owe it. So we're still trying to work through that. It may be that we may just have to negotiate a settlement to get that out from under us.
Mr. McGuire?
Thank you. I have to refresh my memory a little bit more. So how long ago did we sell this nursing home?
April 2019,
19?
I believe.
Yeah, we're going into the budget year of 2023. How much of a swing in the budget will it create in support of our own budget when we pay off the bills that you've already discussed? I mean, is it close to $1 million still?
Well, all the obligations that were owed to other county funds have largely already been incurred, with the exception of that last settlement that we paid this year. So that settlement hit self-funded insurance. Self-funded insurance paid that settlement in March, I think. Mm-hmm. And so there are not ongoing obligations that are expected to hit other county funds, except for if, we were to owe a refund to, for the Medicaid audit or to, United Healthcare, that would be above what we have remaining in fund balance. We are going to have software costs that are roughly around $15,000 until fiscal year 2026. And that's because we're required to have matrix care for 7 years after the sale of the home. But there are not at present, other than I think there are some legal fees that had been still being paid out of self-funded insurance earlier this year. We're not continuing to incur obligations or, liabilities related to the home.
So, my understanding of the way it works, I mean, you won't have to continue to have budget for those funds that are in the insurance plan in next year's budget, because we'll no longer have the nursing home as an expected cost in those budgets.
Yes, so
it
we
will
are not
change.
budgeting for the settlement of those claims in self-funded insurance.
And yet we'll still have at least $150,000 up to $300,000 in next year's budget of 2023. I just wanted to get a clear picture of when we might see this nursing home finally not be an issue for the county. Anyway, thank you.
And it's not expected that those costs would continue to hit any other county funds, although there are still obligations on the books that are owed to other county funds from the nursing home.
So when we were paying for the nursing home expenses and it was in the deficit, we took money out of other accounts and moved it into the nursing home account to pay them. And I'm thinking, is it about 5 million at this point, Tammy, that we still owe those other accounts?
At the end of, actually, I figured somebody would ask me that question, so I did look that up. At the end of this fiscal year, that amount looks like it's going to be a little over 3.6 million. So, and just for clarification, what really happened is more so that, we have a lot of these internal service funds that are used for IMRF and Social Security and liability. What was really happening is that, we were paying for those costs just like every other department, and the nursing home wasn't paying us back into those funds. It is how those obligations were incurred.
So that's come down quite a bit in the last 4 years, but we still do have a little bit to go.
The majority of what is left as outstanding is owed to the general fund, and then there is still some that is owed to self-funded insurance. 3.6 million, a little over 3.6 million.
Mr. Storr?
Thank you. Is that $15,000 per year for the Matrix software?
Yes.
What?
Matrix is the database that keeps track of patient records, and you have to continue by law to keep those records for 7 years. Any other questions? Okay. Thank you, Tammy.
Yeah, I'll just point out the county department ARP requests are included in the back of your binder. And two things, well, actually one thing, because I've already mentioned. One, the mobile command center that the county has done a purchase order for this year is not expected to be received this year. So those funds are going to need to be rebudgeted in fiscal year 2023.
Ms. Furtado.
So our caucus did a series of small group meetings to sort of dig into the ARPA funding and sort of have a collaborative conversation on where we kind of see the next few years going. And I encourage your caucus to do so as well. I wanted to kind of give you a top line reading of broadly where we ended up, sort of what we're thinking. So maybe this can help us sort of start the conversation. And there's general consensus. There's debates, moving a little bit here and there. But the general thought is, first of all, continued commitment to all of the county side things that were articulated, both the jail but then the other items that were listed in the projections. I think that was the missing page in our budget package last week that was in the digital copy, but includes things like the cameras, the continuation of the scanning, all of that. So basically funding out all of the county side requests. Second, there was broad support for the $7 million additional dollars for the broadband, and a sentiment that that is a once in a lifetime sort of thing and that we need to prioritize it. Third, our caucus continues our commitment to support putting 10% of the funding towards community violence prevention, which we've given 1.5, so that would be an additional 2.6 million. And the anticipation is we would continue to run that task force in order to continue to do that. And we had a lot of conversation about, lots of different things under that rubric. And specifically, there was a lot of interest in the conversations that we had for the I read, I count proposal. And it's small enough in value, and I think we're underspending some other categories that I don't see any reason why we couldn't just get that done this year. We want to continue the 3 outstanding commitments that were split between 2 years. So specifically, or 2 or 3 years, the immigrant rights services, the second half of that, the second half of the money for the land bank, keeping people in their homes in the rural areas, and finally, the last 2 years of the cover crop proposal. So in order to get all this to add up, right, we have to move some money around. In the last sort of budget correlation thing that we got from Darlene was that we still had about $3.5 million left in water infrastructure. However, we have given $2 million to the rural districts, an additional $500,000 to mapping the Muhammad Aquifer, and then a commitment to the hazardous waste recycling thing. So we're comfortable in our caucus reducing that $3.5 million ticket to $2.5 million. So with that gets us to the $7 million. And then there's $1 million sort of left, $1.4 million in my calculations that's sort of left. We'd like to see at least $1 million, I think, of that to go to public housing, because it seems like there's some outstanding requests from that, specifically from Habitat for Humanity that we heard, with the caveat that these categories can move around. So we, in the past, we had talked about maybe putting some more money into small business. Doesn't seem like there's as many proposals for that, so we think put it into public housing, and then if an awesome small business proposal comes, we could move that money around. And then anything, this part is just me speaking, anything that's underspent, I personally would like to see that getting pushed into county side projects, because we do know that some of these are going to come in higher than anticipated. But so sort of just I am very much like glossing over like long conversations that we can continue to have in here, but that's sort of where we are. So I just wanted to signal those priorities as you're going forward and preparing the budget, but specifically those commitments to the broadband, to continuing the community health, to prioritizing on the services side, public housing, because that seems where there's still need, slightly reducing the water infrastructure, and then continuing our outstanding commitments both to community projects and county projects as they were articulated in the last budget. So that's sort of where our caucus is.
Any other discussion on any of the ARPA things before we get done for tonight? There will be more discussion on these items, of course. Okay, and you all got the information about the ARPA stuff in your packet last week at the county board meeting, so that's a little more information for you about what money is spent and what might be left. And I thank the Democratic Caucus for talking about it and getting started. It's going to be probably a long meeting the next Tuesday. Okay, before we leave, any other discussion on anything that we've talked about tonight? Tomorrow night's the second half. Get ready. There might be more cookies, and we'll see you tomorrow. Meeting is adjourned.